Welcome to our deep dive into the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah.
We're using an excerpt from the American Yawp to help us unpack this really fascinating period of history.
Yeah. A lot going on. A lot going on in those 10 years.
And I think as we're talking about it, we'll see how those themes still resonate with us today.
Absolutely. It's a decade that continues to fascinate us. It's really a period of dramatic change,
Right.
contradictions,
Yeah.
cultural clashes, all of that. And we'll explore the political landscape, the rise of this consumer culture, iconic figures that we still talk about today, and even the dark undercurrents that
Yeah.
simmered beneath the surface.
So let's start with President Harding's, his famous promise of a return to normalcy
Right.
after World War One. And I think, it's a very appealing idea, I think, on the surface.
Right.
Like you're coming out of this period of war.
Exact.
And
Yeah.
you're craving stability and just that idea of like normal. But the 1920s were anything but normal.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And you're coming out of this period of major upheaval.
Right.
You've got the aftermath of devastating war. You've got the Red Scare,
Right.
which was this intense fear of, communist and anarchist influence.
Yeah.
And then a flu pandemic that wiped out millions.
Right.
So people were,
That's right.
really craving
Yeah.
stability and security.
Right. And I think that's what Harding was tapping into, right?
Yeah.
It was like this longing for a simpler time.
Exactly.
But of course, it's that idea that return to normalcy was more of a slogan than a reality.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's that clash
Yeah.
between this yearning for the past and
Yes.
the reality of rapid change
Right.
that really defines the era.
Okay, so let's dig into the political landscape a little bit.
Yeah.
The excerpt mentions that the Republican Party really dominated the 1920s. They had the presidency. They held both houses of Congress.
Right.
So what was their agenda like?
Well, you can think big business. Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover,
Mm-hmm.
all three of them
Okay.
favored policies that put business interests, right at the center.
Right.
I mean, Coolidge even famously said, "The
Right.
chief business of the American people is business." Can you imagine that as the guiding principle of your government?
Right.
So it's no surprise that the decade saw a surge in corporate power and economic growth.
Yeah.
But it also meant that other issues, like social welfare or
Right.
workers' rights,
Yeah.
kind of took a backseat.
And of course, we can't forget about the Teapot Dome scandal,
Right.
right? That tarnished Harding's presidency.
Yeah.
It's just, it's sort of a reminder that things aren't always as they seem,
Yeah, absolutely.
even when the economy's booming.
It really exposed the corruption
Right.
that was lurking beneath the surface of this
Yeah.
pro-business agenda.
Okay. So while the politicians are busy with their agendas, American culture is undergoing this massive transformation, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
Right.
And this is the era where you see the rise of consumerism
Right.
as a powerful force
Right.
shaping everyday life.
Yeah.
Mass production, advertising, easy credit,
Yeah.
just flooding the market with new products that were
Right.
previously out of reach for most people.
Right.
Cars, radios, appliances.
Yeah.
Suddenly, these things became symbols of, the modern American dream.
The excerpt even talks about department stores and mail order catalogs becoming like wildly popular,
Right.
which is, so fascinating to think about. That's almost like, the early days of online shopping in a way.
Exactly.
Where you can, browse through these glossy pages
Yeah.
filled with all the latest gadgets and fashions.
And it wasn't just about acquiring things.
Right.
It became a leisure activity, a way to express your identity, even
Yeah.
escape from the
Right.
anxieties of modern life.
Speaking of escape, this is also the golden age of Hollywood,
Right.
where movies offered this, dazzling escape from everyday life, this world of glamour and fantasy and larger than life heroes. It must have been so magical to step into those lavish movie palaces
Oh, yeah.
and get swept away by the silver screen.
And then you've got radio,
Yeah.
which, brought entertainment, news, sporting events
Wow.
right into people's living rooms.
Right into their homes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard to, it's hard to overstate how transformative this was.
Right.
I mean, imagine a world without television or the internet,
Yeah.
where your primary source of information and entertainment was this little box that brought the world to you through sound.
Yeah, it's like the social media of its time in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone's tuning into the same programs, listening to the same music,
Yeah.
following the same sports heroes.
Exactly. And speaking of heroes, you've got figures like Jack Dempsey, Red Grange, and of course the one and only Babe Ruth.
Oh, yeah.
They became more than just athletes.
Right.
They were cultural icons,
Right.
who embodied the energy and the aspirations of the era.
It's amazing how those figures captured the public imagination.
Yeah.
Each in their own way, they kind of represented strength and resilience.
Right.
And this sense of possibility, which I think people really needed.
Yeah.
After the trauma of war.
And then you have Charles Lindbergh.
Yeah.
His solo transatlantic flight in 1927 just captured the world's attention.
It's true.
Here was this, this young man who dared to do what no one had done before, a feat of incredible skill and daring.
Right.
And it really seemed to embody that spirit of progress and innovation.
That defined the era.
Imagine the world holding its breath as they're following his journey.
Yeah.
Listening to the radio updates.
Yeah.
Eager for news of his safe arrival. It must have been a truly unifying moment.
It really was.
Yeah.
And, it speaks to the anxieties and aspirations of the era.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this, this incredible excitement about technology and what it could achieve.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's still this, this lingering trauma from the war, this sense of uncertainty about the future.
Right.
And Lindbergh's flight offered, a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
A reminder of the power of human ingenuity.
Okay, so we've got this, booming economy. We've got this vibrant cultural scene, these larger-than-life heroes.
Right.
But as we know, every era has its shadow side.
Absolutely.
And the 1920s were also a time of deep social divisions and anxieties.
Yeah.
Let me say. Oh, yeah. Beneath the surface of all that progress and prosperity, there were darker currents at play.
Right.
A clash of values was brewing, fueled by fears of change and a desire to, cling to traditional ways of life.
Right. The excerpt even mentions the Sacco and Vanzetti case, which really highlights this anti-immigrant sentiment that was kind of bubbling up during this period.
This case is it's a tragic example of how fear and prejudice can undermine justice.
Right.
These two Italian immigrants who are also anarchists were convicted and executed for murder despite flimsy evidence.
Right.
And their trial just became this this lightning rod for debates about immigration, political radicalism, the very definition of American identity.
It's just a reminder that even in a nation that's, built by immigrants, there's often this fear of the other, this tendency to scapegoat those who are perceived as different or threatening.
And that fear often translates into policy.
Right.
The 1920s saw a passage of restrictive immigration laws, like the Emergency Quota Act and the National Origins Act.
Right.
And you can think of these laws as slamming the door on certain groups of immigrants, particularly those from Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia.
Right.
It was a direct response to this nativist sentiment, this belief that America should be preserved for those deemed, truly American.
It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction to all of the changes that are happening so rapidly.
Right.
People are grasping for a sense of control.
Yeah.
And for some people, that means excluding those who don't fit their narrow definition of who should be an American.
And that exclusion wasn't limited to immigrants.
Right.
Sadly, Black Americans continue to face just horrific racism and violence during this era.
Yeah.
The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 stands as just this horrifying example of the brutality and injustice that persisted despite, the so-called roaring times.
Right.
I mean, imagine an entire Black community being targeted, their homes and businesses destroyed by a white mob.
It's a stark reminder that the narrative of progress often leaves out the
Right.
experiences of those who are marginalized and oppressed.
Absolutely.
It's heartbreaking to think about the loss of life,
Yeah.
the destruction of a community,
Yeah.
the deep trauma that lingered for generations.
Yeah.
It's a dark stain on American history.
Absolutely.
And a sobering reminder that beneath the surface of progress,
Right.
these deeply ingrained prejudices continued to fester.
And speaking of prejudice, we see the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan during this period.
Right.
And it's not just, it's not just about anti-Black racism anymore.
Right.
They expanded their targets to include Catholics, Jews, immigrants, anyone they perceived as a threat to their warped vision of a pure America.
It's chilling to think that an organization promoting hate and violence
Yeah.
could gain such a foothold in American society,
Yeah.
especially during a time of
Right.
such economic and cultural dynamism.
Right.
It speaks to those anxieties and fears
Yeah.
lurking beneath the surface of all that progress.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it reminds us that
Yeah.
progress
Yeah,
is
yeah.
rarely linear.
Right.
Often it's accompanied
Right.
by backlash. Yeah.
By those who feel threatened by change
Right.
and seek to cling to power by any means necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this clash of values playing out on
Yeah.
a social and political level.
Yeah.
But it also extends to the religious sphere as well.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
This is the era when religious fundamentalism
Right.
really emerges as a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
You have this clash between liberal and fundamentalist Christianity,
Right.
highlighting those tensions
Yeah.
between traditional beliefs
Yeah.
and the challenges of modernity.
Right. The excerpt mentions the Scopes monkey trial of 1925,
Yeah.
which, put this conflict front and center on the national stage.
He was like a media circus.
Right.
It all revolved around John T. Scopes,
Right.
a high school teacher in Tennessee
Right.
who was accused of violating state law.
Yeah. By teaching Darwin's theory of evolution.
Right.
So on one side, you had Clarence Darrow,
Right.
this, famous defense attorney and agnostic,
Right.
arguing for academic freedom
Right.
and the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you had William Jennings Bryan,
Right.
a 3-time presidential candidate
Right.
and staunch defender of, biblical literalism,
Yeah.
arguing that the Bible should be interpreted literally,
Yeah.
and that evolution was this dangerous threat to
Right.
morality.
I mean, imagine, living in a time when teaching about science could land you in court.
Right.
It's a reminder of
Yeah.
how powerful those forces of tradition and belief can be,
Yeah.
even in the face of, overwhelming scientific evidence.
Exactly. And while the trial itself was
Yeah.
ultimately seen as a victory
Yeah.
for modernists,
Right.
it also marked a
Yeah.
turning point
Right.
for fundamentalism.
Right.
It didn't go away.
Right.
It retreated, regrouped,
Right.
and would reemerge
Right.
with even greater force
Right.
in later decades.
So we've got this clash of values
Yes.
playing out on multiple levels.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Roaring '20s
Yeah.
were this pressure cooker
Yeah.
of change.
Yeah.
And these anxieties are, they're bound to erupt in some way.
Exactly. And speaking of change, we can't forget about the changing role
Yeah.
of women during this period.
Right.
This is the era of the flapper.
Right.
You know, that iconic image of a
Right.
young woman
Right.
with bobbed hair, short skirts, and a rebellious spirit.
Yeah.
She's dancing to jazz, smoking cigarettes,
Right.
challenging those traditional expectations
Right.
of femininity.
It's such a powerful image,
It is.
isn't it? It really encapsulates that spirit of liberation
Yeah.
that was sweeping through society.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the flapper experience
Right.
wasn't universal.
Exactly.
Right.
It was primarily a phenomenon among young white middle-class women.
Right.
For many other women, particularly women of color,
Right.
the realities were much different.
Right.
They faced persistent discrimination.
Right.
And were often excluded from the, the opportunities and freedoms enjoyed by their, more privileged counterparts.
The excerpt even mentions that tension, right?
Yeah.
This tension between progress and limitations for women.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have, they gained the right to vote
Right.
with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they're still facing barriers in education, employment, and social expectations.
It's that constant push and pull between breaking free from tradition and still being constrained by it.
Right. It's like this dance between progress
Exactly.
and backlash that we see happening throughout the 1920s.
Yeah.
Speaking of, pushing boundaries and challenging expectations, we can't forget about the Harlem Renaissance.
Right.
This cultural movement that witnessed just this explosion of Black art, literature, music, and theater, celebrating Black identity and challenging racist stereotypes.
Imagine this this vibrant cultural scene in Harlem, New York City, where Black artists, writers, musicians, intellectuals are creating these groundbreaking works that just defy those prevailing narratives about Black life in America. It's a moment of incredible creativity, intellectual ferment, and social activism.
And it's amazing to think about the impact that this movement had.
Yeah.
Not just in the 1920s, but for generations to come.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, their works continue to inspire and challenge us today.
The Harlem Renaissance was really a testament to the resilience and creativity of the Black community, even in the face of persistent racism and discrimination. It gave voice to Black experiences and perspectives, and it helped to reshape the image of Black Americans in the eyes of the world.
But it's important to remember that this cultural flowering wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Right. Yeah.
It took place against this backdrop of ongoing struggle, of systemic racism that permeated every aspect of American life.
The Harlem Renaissance shouldn't be romanticized.
Right.
It was a moment of both celebration and resistance.
Right.
A powerful expression of Black identity and a challenge to the status quo.
Right.
And it's important to remember that the gains made during this period were often fragile and easily reversed.
And speaking of challenging the status quo, we also see the rise of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, during this time.
Garvey was a controversial figure. He was this Jamaican-born activist who advocated for Black nationalism, economic self-sufficiency, and a back to Africa movement. His message resonated with many Black Americans who were disillusioned by the by the slow pace of progress in achieving equality in America.
And his approach was definitely more radical than other civil rights leaders of the time. He critiqued organizations like the NAATP for their focus on integration and legal challenges, arguing that Black people needed to create their own destiny independent of white society. His ideas were ultimately unsuccessful. And he was deported from the United States in 1927. But his impact on Black consciousness, both in America and abroad, was significant. He helped to inspire this sense of Black pride and self-reliance that would continue to influence future generations of activists and leaders.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how his legacy continues to be debated even today. He's this complex figure who challenged the status quo and pushed for radical change. But his views were also often divisive and controversial.
Absolutely.
And I think that complexity kind of reflects the broader tensions of the era. This constant interplay between progress and backlash. between, the desire for a better future
Yeah.
and the fear of losing
Right.
what you already have.
Exactly.
It's almost like the Roaring '20s,
Yeah.
where this period
Yeah.
of intense experimentation,
Yeah. Yeah.
a time when people were trying to figure out
Yeah.
what it meant to be modern,
Yeah.
to be American
Yeah.
in this rapidly changing world.
Exactly. Yeah. So are you ready to hear some voices from the 1920s?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
We've got some fascinating primary sources that will really bring this era to life.
Okay.
First up, let's hear from the man himself, Warren G. Harding.
Okay.
We have an excerpt from a speech he
Right.
delivered during his presidential campaign in 1920,
Right.
right when he was promising that return to normalcy.
Okay, so what did normalcy actually mean to him?
Well, he talks about America needing healing
Okay.
and restoration after
Yeah.
years of war and social unrest.
Right.
It's interesting how he uses those words, almost like the nation itself is a wounded patient needing care.
Yeah.
He goes on to criticize what he calls radicalism
Okay.
and emphasizes the need for stability order
Yeah.
and a focus on domestic issues.
Right. So it's not just about going back to the way things were before the war.
Right.
It's about rejecting these forces
Yeah.
that he sees as
Exactly.
disruptive or threatening to the social fabric.
And that message really resonated with a
Yeah.
lot of Americans who were
Yeah.
tired of conflict and upheaval.
Right.
They were yearning for that sense of security and a return to,
Right.
familiar values.
Okay, so we've got Harding representing this desire for stability.
Yeah.
What other perspectives do we have?
Next, let's hear from a very different voice,
Okay.
Crystal Eastman.
Okay.
She was a socialist and a feminist
Okay.
who wrote this powerful piece in 1920,
Right.
right after women won the right to vote
Right.
with the ratification of the 19th Amendment.
Wow. Talk about a pivotal moment in history. I'm curious to hear what Eastman had to say.
Well, she celebrates the victory of suffrage, of
Yeah,
course.
right.
But she also argues that the fight for women's equality is far from over.
Right.
She calls for
Yeah.
continued activism
No,
to
good.
address issues like
Right.
economic inequality,
Okay.
access to education and healthcare,
Right.
and legal protections
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
for women in the workplace.
It sounds like she saw the right to vote
Yeah.
as this crucial step,
Right.
but not the final destination.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
She understood that that true equality requires
Yeah.
more than just
Yeah.
political rights.
Right.
It requires addressing the systemic barriers
Right.
that prevent women from achieving full
Yeah.
economic
Right.
and social independence.
Right.
It's a message
Yeah.
that still resonates strongly today.
It's amazing to think about how these debates
Yeah.
from a century ago
Right.
are still relevant
Yeah.
to our lives today.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a little bit and jump into the heart of the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
We have an excerpt from a 1921 recording
Yeah.
by Marcus Garvey,
Okay.
the Jamaican-born
Right.
Black nationalist leader
Right.
who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association.
Garvey, a powerful and controversial figure.
Yes.
I'm ready to hear his message.
In this recording, he's talking about the need for Black people to unite and build their own institutions,
Okay.
businesses, and communities,
Right.
both in America and in Africa.
Okay.
He really emphasizes
Yeah.
racial pride, self-determination,
Yeah.
and the importance of
Yeah.
economic empowerment.
Right. So it's a message that challenged that prevailing notion
Right.
that Black people should seek integration and assimilation into white society.
Exactly.
It's about creating
Yeah.
a separate space
Yeah.
for Black identity
Right.
and Black progress.
And that's what made him so controversial.
Right.
While his ideas resonated with
Right.
many Black Americans who were
Yeah.
tired of waiting for equality,
Yeah.
he was also criticized for
Yeah.
his separatist views and
Right.
his sometimes authoritarian leadership style.
It's fascinating to see how these
Yeah.
different strands
Yeah.
of the Black freedom struggle were kind of playing out
Yeah.
during this period.
Yeah.
You've got figures like W.E.B. Du Bois
Right.
advocating for integration and equal rights.
Yeah.
And then you have Garvey pushing for
Yeah.
this more radical vision of black self-determination.
And both of those visions were shaped by
Yeah.
the realities
Yeah.
of racism and discrimination that Black people faced every day.
They were responding to the same problem,
Right.
but with different approaches and different goals.
Okay, so we've heard from a president, a feminist,
Yeah.
and a Black nationalist leader.
Yeah.
What other voices from the 1920s do we have?
Well, let's take a look at the dark side of this era.
Okay.
We have an excerpt from a 1926 article
Yeah.
by Hiram Evans,
Okay.
the Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Wow, this is gonna be chilling.
It's disturbing to say the least.
Yeah.
He's basically laying out the Klan's ideology,
Right.
and it's rooted in white supremacy,
Okay.
nativism,
Yeah.
and Protestant fundamentalism.
Right.
He rails against immigrants,
Right.
Catholics,
Yeah.
Jews,
Yeah.
anyone he sees as a threat
Yeah.
to his twisted vision
Right.
of a pure America. It's hard to believe that
Yeah.
this kind of hate mongering was
Yeah.
happening
Yeah.
in the midst of all the cultural and economic progress of
Yeah.
the Roaring '20s.
It's a stark reminder that progress doesn't always benefit everyone equally.
Yeah.
And that for some people, progress itself is seen as a threat, something to be resisted and even violently opposed.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what it must have been like to live in that time.
Yeah.
To be on the receiving end of that kind of hatred and bigotry.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that that we can't take progress for granted.
Right.
We have to be vigilant in defending the rights of
Yeah.
all people, regardless of their race,
Right.
religion, or origin.
Okay, let's shift gears again.
Okay.
We have an excerpt from a speech
Yeah.
by Herbert Hoover,
Okay.
delivered in 1928 during his presidential campaign.
Hoover,
Yeah.
the great engineer,
Yeah.
was a classic Republican of his time. He was all about individual initiative, limited government,
Right.
and the power of free enterprise.
Right.
And in this speech, he's celebrating the economic prosperity of the 1920s,
Right.
and attributing it to Republican policies that promoted business growth.
Right. But as we know, that prosperity wasn't shared by everyone.
Exactly.
And it was built on a foundation of shaky credit and speculation that would eventually lead to disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Hoover's perspective represents the dominant ideology of the time, this belief that that the government should stay out of the economy,
Right.
and let the market work its magic.
Right. But as we'll see, that hands-off approach would prove to be disastrous when the Great Depression hit.
Yeah.
It's almost like he was living in a bubble, oblivious to the struggles of those who were being left behind by this economic boom.
It's a classic example of how political rhetoric can be disconnected from the lived experiences of everyday people.
Okay, so we've heard from politicians, activists, and even the leader of the KKK.
Right.
What other voices do we have?
Well, to get a sense of what young people were thinking and doing, let's hear from a self-described semi-flapper named Ellen Wells Page.
Okay.
She wrote an article in 1922 attempting to explain the flapper phenomenon to a skeptical older generation.
This should be fun.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in how young people challenge the status quo and push boundaries.
Well, she argues that flappers aren't rebellious or immoral, but rather simply expressing their newfound freedom and individuality.
Right.
She talks about their desire to break free from Victorian constraints, to have fun, to explore new experiences, and to define their own identities.
It's like she's saying, hey, we're not trying to tear down society. We're just trying to live our lives on our own terms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a message that
Yeah.
resonated with many young people at the time, both women and men.
Yeah.
It's about, challenging outdated social norms, and embracing the possibilities of a rapidly changing world.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
We have an excerpt from a 1925 essay
All right.
by Elaine Locke,
All right.
one of the leading intellectuals of the movement.
Right.
It's titled "Enter the New Negro."
Locke was a brilliant scholar and writer who championed Black artistic expression and cultural pride.
Yeah.
And in this essay, he's basically announcing the arrival of a new generation of Black Americans who are breaking free from the shackles of racism and forging a new path toward equality and self-determination.
That sounds like a powerful declaration of
That is.
Of independence and self-belief.
Yeah. Locke celebrates the cultural achievements of the Harlem Renaissance, arguing that Black artists and intellectuals are creating this new vision of Black identity, one rooted in self-respect, creativity, and a refusal to be defined by white society.
And it's amazing to think about how this movement helped to reshape the image of Black Americans and inspire future generations of activists and artists.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about art and culture. Locke saw the Harlem Renaissance as part of this broader struggle for social and political justice. It was about challenging racist stereotypes, demanding equal rights, and creating a more just and equitable society for all.
So we've heard from presidents, activists, intellectuals, and even a semi-flapper.
That's right.
What's left to explore in our journey through the 1920s?
Well, we can't talk about the Roaring '20s without talking about the rise of consumer culture. Right. Remember, this is the era when advertising really takes off as this powerful force shaping people's desires and aspirations. Right. We have a collection of advertisements from popular magazines like Photoplay. Which was geared towards movie fans.
Oh, I love this. It's like stepping back in time and seeing the world through the eyes of consumers from a century ago.
These ads are fascinating because they tell us so much about the products, the trends, and even the anxieties of the time. You'll see ads for everything from automobiles and cigarettes to beauty products and household appliances.
What kind of messages do these ads convey?
Well, they often tap into themes of modernity, convenience, luxury, and self-improvement. They're selling a lifestyle, a vision of a better, easier, and more glamorous life that can be achieved through through the purchase of their products.
It's like they're saying you can have it all.
Exactly.
Just buy this product and you'll be happier, more successful, more attractive, more everything.
And they also reveal how gender roles and expectations were being both reinforced and challenged by consumer culture. You'll see ads targeting women as both homemakers and independent consumers, reflecting the changing dynamics of work and leisure in the 1920s.
And of course the power of celebrity is on full display. I bet those movie magazine ads were full of glamorous stars endorsing all sorts of products. It's fascinating to see how advertising, media, and celebrity culture all converge to create this new consumer landscape.
And that landscape would have a profound impact on the economy. The rise of consumer credit made it easier for people to buy things they couldn't afford, which fueled the economic boom
of the 1920s.
Right.
But as we'll see in our next segment,
Right.
that same reliance on credit
Yeah.
would also contribute
Yeah.
to the devastating crash
Right.
that brought
Right.
the Roaring Twenties to
Right.
a screeching halt.
So we've explored the political, cultural, and social landscape of the 1920s, and we've heard from just this fascinating array of voices from the era.
Yeah.
We've seen how the decade was marked by both remarkable progress and disturbing backlash.
Yeah.
By both individual liberation
Yeah.
and societal anxieties.
It's been a whirlwind tour, hasn't it?
It has. It really has.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface.
So as we move into our final segment,
Yeah.
we have to address the elephant in the room,
Right.
the Great Depression, right?
The event that brought the Roaring Twenties to this this dramatic and painful end.
Yeah. And while the crash of 1929 may have seemed sudden, the seeds of this this economic catastrophe were sown during the boom years that preceded it.
Right.
So in our next segment, we'll delve into the causes of the Great Depression, exploring the economic policies, the social trends, and the global forces that contributed to this this unprecedented crisis.
Yeah.
And we'll hear from people who lived through those tumultuous times, sharing their stories of hardship, resilience, and hope. Stay with us.
You know, it's almost hard to fathom how a decade that started with so much exuberance and excess could end in such widespread hardship.
Yeah, I know. It's a dramatic shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
You go from flappers dancing with the Charleston to bread lines stretching for blocks. It's the contrast is stark.
So let's dive into this.
Yeah.
You know, what were the underlying factors that led to the Great Depression? Was it just one thing or a combination of things?
It was definitely a confluence of factors.
Okay.
A perfect storm brewing beneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties.
Right.
You know, think of it like a car with a bunch of warning lights flashing.
Yeah.
But everyone's too busy enjoying the ride to notice.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what were some of these warning lights?
Well, one major issue was the growing gap between the rich and the poor.
Okay.
You know, a small percentage of Americans held a disproportionate amount of the wealth, while wages for most workers stagnated.
Yeah.
You know, imagine a pie where a tiny sliver of the population is devouring huge slices, leaving only crumbs for everyone else.
So even during the economic boom, many Americans weren't actually reaping the benefits.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And this lack of purchasing power among the majority of the population meant that they couldn't sustain that consumer spending that had been driving the economy.
Right.
It's like building a house on a foundation of sand.
Right.
It looks great for a while, but it's not going to last.
Yeah.
And the excerpt mentioned that farmers were hit especially hard.
Yeah.
During this time.
Right.
Why was that?
Farmers faced a double whammy.
Okay.
They were dealing with overproduction, which led to falling prices for their crops. Right. And they were also struggling with mounting debt due to loans they had taken out to buy new equipment and expand their operations. Right. Many of them were forced to sell their farms and move to cities in search of work.
It's heartbreaking to think about these families losing their farms, their livelihoods, their way of life.
It was a devastating time for many Americans.
Right.
And then, of course, there was the stock market crash of 1929, which is often seen as the official start of the Great Depression.
Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929.
Yeah.
That date's etched in history.
Yeah.
So much wealth just vanished in an instant.
I know.
But was the crash the cause of the Depression?
Right.
Or was it more like a symptom of deeper problems?
It was more of a symptom.
Okay.
The moment the house of cards finally collapsed. The crash exposed the underlying weaknesses of the economy.
Right.
You know, the market had been driven to unsustainable heights by speculation and easy credit.
Right.
And when that bubble burst,
Yeah.
it triggered a chain
This
reaction.
was like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Banks failed.
Right.
Businesses closed.
Yeah.
Millions of people
Right.
lost their jobs and their savings.
Yeah.
And as the crisis deepened,
Yeah.
it created this this downward spiral.
Right.
People stopped spending money,
Right.
which led to more businesses closing
Yeah.
and even more job losses.
It must have felt like the world was falling apart.
Yeah, it was the psychological impact
Yeah.
of the Depression was
Yeah.
immense.
Yeah.
People lost their homes,
Yeah.
their sense of security, their hope for the future.
Right.
It was a time of widespread despair
Yeah.
and hardship.
So how did the government respond to this this crisis?
Well, initially the response was
Yeah.
slow
All
and
right.
inadequate. President Hoover,
Right.
a staunch believer in limited government intervention,
Oh.
hesitated
Yeah.
to take decisive action.
Okay.
He, he believed that the economy would eventually right itself,
Okay.
and that,
Yeah.
government handouts would create dependency.
So he essentially stuck to his
Yeah.
laissez-faire principles even as the situation
Yeah.
spiraled out of control.
And that approach
Yeah.
proved disastrous.
Right.
Unemployment continued to soar,
Mm.
reaching a staggering 25%
Oh.
by 1933.
Right.
Shanty towns,
Yeah.
known as Hoovervilles,
Right.
sprung up across
Right.
the country. A
Yeah.
a stark symbol of the
Mm.
government's failure to
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
the suffering of its citizens.
It's almost hard to believe that people were living in these
Yeah.
makeshift shacks in
Yeah.
the richest country in the world.
It was a time of
Yeah.
immense hardship and
Right.
desperation.
Right.
And it led to this this growing sense of anger
Yeah.
and disillusionment with the government.
So it's no surprise that Hoover was voted out of office
Yeah.
in 1932.
Exactly.
Right.
And the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt
Yeah.
really marked a turning point in
Yeah.
the nation's
Yeah.
response to the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Roosevelt, with his New Deal programs,
Yeah.
took a much more
Yeah.
activist approach.
Yeah.
He implemented a wide range of government interventions
Mhm.
aimed at
Right.
providing relief, recovery, and
Yeah.
reform.
The New Deal was a pretty revolutionary set of programs.
My
wasn't
view
it?
was.
Yeah. It touched almost every aspect of
Yeah.
American life.
It was a dramatic departure
Yeah.
from the
Well,
laissez-faire policies
yeah.
of the past. Think about it.
Yeah.
The government suddenly stepping in
Right.
to create jobs,
Right.
provide financial assistance to
Yeah.
the unemployed,
Yeah, yeah.
elderly,
Right.
regulate the banking industry and the stock market,
Yeah.
and invest in
Yeah.
infrastructure projects.
Right. And of course, not everyone was happy about this
That's true.
expansion of
Yeah.
government power.
The New Deal
Yeah.
was controversial
Yeah.
and faced fierce opposition from those who believed it was,
Yeah.
too socialist, that
Right.
it was creating
Yeah.
a bloated bureaucracy,
Yeah.
and that it was stifling individual initiative.
It sounds like a very
Yeah.
familiar
Yeah.
debate even today.
It definitely resonates with,
Right.
with contemporary political discussions.
Right.
Yeah.
But for millions of Americans,
Yeah.
the New Deal was a lifeline.
It was. It provided them with
Yeah.
jobs,
Wow.
food,
Yeah.
a sense of hope,
Yeah.
and a belief that the government could play a role
Yeah.
in alleviating
Yeah.
their suffering.
It's fascinating to think about how the Great Depression
Yeah.
fundamentally reshaped
It did.
the relationship between the
Yes.
government and
Yeah.
the people.
It led to a greater acceptance
Yeah.
of government intervention in the economy, and a recognition of
Yeah.
the need for
Yeah.
social safety nets to
Right.
protect the most vulnerable members of society. And this legacy
Yeah.
continues to shape
Right.
political debates today.
So the New Deal offered some relief,
Mm.
but did it actually end the
Right.
Great Depression?
The New Deal helped to alleviate some of the worst effects of the Depression,
Right.
but it didn't fully end the crisis.
Okay.
Ultimately, it took another global event,
Right.
World War II, to
Right.
pull the United States out of the economic doldrums.
It's a bit sobering to think that it took a
Yeah.
war to finally bring back
I know.
prosperity.
It is, but it also, highlights the interconnectedness
Right.
of history.
Right.
Events on a global scale
Yeah.
can have a profound impact on individual lives, and even the most devastating crises can lead to unexpected transformations.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground
Yeah.
in this deep dive into the
Yeah.
1920s. From the exuberance of the Roaring Twenties
Yeah.
to the despair
Right.
of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey.
Quite a decade.
It is. It is. I think what strikes me most is how the themes of this era,
Yeah.
the tensions and the contradictions
Yeah.
still resonate
Yeah.
with us today.
Yeah.
We're still grappling
Yeah.
with issues of
Yeah.
economic inequality,
Yeah.
social justice,
Yeah.
the role of government,
Yeah.
the clash
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
tradition and modernity.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's almost like the
Yeah.
Roaring Twenties were a microcosm
Yeah.
of the challenges
Yeah.
that we continue to face as a society.
I think you're right.
I know.
Yeah, and perhaps
Yeah.
by studying the past, by
Yeah.
understanding the complexities of this era,
Right.
we can gain a deeper understanding of our own. Yeah.
Present.
Right.
Make more informed choices about the future.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Roaring Twenties,
It's been a wild ride.
it has been. It has been. I hope you'll walk away with a greater appreciation for this fascinating and complex period in American history, and I hope it'll spark some reflection on how the lessons of the past can inform our understanding of the present and guide us toward a better future.
Well said. It's been a pleasure exploring this era with you.
Likewise.
Until next time.